And so this day is one of tribute, not only to the strength of those who withstood the horrid moments in Sandy Hook, but those who have continued to walk and push for peace. This is what this is about, but not only peace in Sandy Hook, because there have been moments like that within Connecticut that have ravaged our community. The twin demons of poverty and anger have strewn and walked through our communities. We must do something. And today we have gathered to lift our voices so that it might be heard not only in our government, but in the hearts of every citizen of our state. And so today we ask that you listen, but not only listen, act, and call those who are responsible for the laws that govern this great state of ours, if not only the state, the nation. So following me, you will hear the names of those who are being held in extraordinary grace. We'll hear from those who have suffered and those who are triumphing over their pain. So we thank you for being here today. And please remember that your vote, your thoughts, your actions count.
Thank you, Deacon Art. And we will now be hearing from U.S. Senator Chris Murphy.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you, Deacon Miller, for those words. It is unthinkable that it's been 8 years. Those little boys and girls would be starting high school this year. Those parents, those young women, those educators inside of those classrooms would have had 8 fantastic years of personal growth time with friends, maybe marriages, maybe children of their own. It's been 8 years, and yet the pain feels so unbelievably fresh. The loss is no less, of course, first and foremost, for those who lost their children or their brothers and sisters, their parents that day. And so I'm so grateful to CAGV for gathering us all together today. I'm grateful to be on the call with a number of heroes and advocates, survivors. And I think there are so many emotions that run through us today and so many causes that we have to elevate. First and foremost, it's important to just remember the victims, to remember these lives, how precious they were and how their greatness was stolen from us. It's important for us to send out our prayers and thoughts to these families that are still struggling so deeply. I often talk to many of the parents from Sandy Hook. Any day that there is a mass shooting that rises to the level of national attention, those days are particularly difficult. But of course, no day is worse than this, especially as it always arrives right on the precipice of the holiday season. It's important today to remind folks that doing kind, nice things, no matter how small or big, that's a really important way to remember what happened. That's a way to spread the grace and love that existed inside of these kids and those educators. And then, of course, it's important to remember that there are a handful of us who are in positions of power and authority that have a different kind of responsibility to accept that what happened in Sandy Hook is not inevitable. It is not unchangeable, and that there are laws on the books of the United States today that make that kind of horror, that kind of carnage much more likely than if we were able to pass a set of different laws that made it harder for anyone to be able to get their hands on a weapon of that power and carry out a crime of that magnitude. Dick and I and Ned and Susan are on this call today, and maybe others from the delegation from the state level. We commit ourselves to trying to rattle the moral conscience of our colleagues to make them understand that every day Congress does nothing is a day that we are complicit in crime after crime after crime. And lastly, Janet Rice is on this call, and there are probably others like her. Janet's son, Shane, was killed about a month and a half before Sandy Hook on the streets of Hartford, about a block from where I live now. His death didn't make national news. It barely made the state papers. He was the 20th victim of gun violence that year in Hartford. 100 people die every day, most of them nameless, most of them not showing up in our collective national conscience. But that stain of daily gun violence, the homicides, the suicides, the accidental shootings, all of that is just as preventable. All of that is just as much a part of the story of our national tragedy. It's been 8 years, 8 long years, but 8 years in which I hope all of us have tried to strive to become better people, to honor the memory of those students and those educators. Thank you, Jeremy, for joining us here today. I'm grateful to be on a call of friends, leaders, and advocates.
Thank you so much, Senator Murphy. We truly value your leadership on this and your words. A true champion of gun violence prevention. Thank you again for being a part of our community. Up next, we will hear from our Senator, Governor Ned Lamont.
Hey, Jeremy. Good morning, everybody. Apologize, I'm not clever enough to do Zoom while in a car. Let me just follow up on what Senator Murphy said. And he said it so beautifully in his book, The Violence Within Us. It's an ongoing struggle. And it's sadly uniquely American in many ways. And this, the 8th anniversary of Sandy Hook, but every day there is an anniversary of some avoidable gun-related death and violence. I wanted to say, in particular, in this day and age, with COVID, sadly, we have more guns, legal and illegal, on our streets than ever before. We have extreme stress and isolation and distress. And you see that reflected in many different ways. You see that with just a spike in shootings in all of our major cities, isolated murders in a lot of our small towns. And I'd like to just say something else, that all this is related to guns, and so are suicides. We have more suicides than homicides, and more severe today than any time in a long time. And this is why, as Chris said, so beautifully there, believe me, you've got elected leaders. We're on this phone. We're going to make sure Connecticut stays a leader. I like to lead by example in terms of everything we can do with gun safety. Jeremy is our conscience, reminding us every day, as are each and every one of you, and Chris and Dick and the delegation down in Washington, leading by example as well. But as Chris said, especially in this time of the year, reach out to somebody. There are more people, we call it quarantine, but for them it's isolation, it's distress. We have kids who haven't been able to go to school for many months, haven't been able to see a coach, and that is creating incredible distress. We have a lot of our seniors who are by themselves right now. And, one little gift to the holidays would just be a phone call. Just say we're thinking about you and how important that is. And anything we can do to head off the potential for violence often related to guns, we're going to continue to take the lead on and remember those amazing kids from Sandy Hook every day. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Governor. We really appreciate you being here today. Next, we will hear from U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal.
Thanks so much, Jeremy, and thank you to CAGV for its really constant and consistent commitment to the cause of ending gun violence. Literally for decades, you have been, as an organization, the conscience of Connecticut, and I'm so proud to be with you and other elected leaders and faith leaders and community leaders on this call. The governor's absolutely right that Connecticut has been at the forefront of the cause combating gun violence, spurred in part by that tragedy 8 years ago. But we know that Connecticut is no safer with the strongest gun laws in the nation than states with the weakest gun laws, because guns cross state boundaries and guns have no respect for state lines. So we are all in this epidemic of gun violence together as a nation. And my hope is that the nation as a whole will take this occasion, the 8th anniversary of that tragedy at Sandy Hook, to strengthen its determination to combat gun violence. The simple fact is that we must mark this anniversary with renewed resolve to fight gun violence. Under a new administration that is committed to this cause, we have a historic opportunity. Under this administration, with a president who has committed himself throughout his lifetime to fighting gun violence, we can adopt those common sense measures that very simply keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, whether they're universal background checks or emergency risk protection orders, safe storage, Ethan's Law, or even a ban on assault weapons and high capacity magazines. These common sense steps are achievable. And we know that the best way to honor those beautiful lives lost at Sandy Hook is through action. Honor with action. My mind goes back to that day often. Senator Murphy and I were there that afternoon, and we saw and heard the grief of that day. And that night, I remember vividly, we gathered at St. Rose of Lima Church. And I said to everyone who was there, the world is watching. And in fact, the world has watched. This wonderful community of Newtown, the families who have acted to honor their loved ones with such grace and dignity and courage in championing this cause. I remember that evening, one of the moms whom I approached, and I said, when you're ready, we should talk about what we can do about gun violence. And she said, through her tears, and then mine, I'm ready now. That kind of courage and fortitude will eventually enable us to conquer this monster of gun violence. The pandemic is no excuse for inaction against the epidemic of gun violence. In fact, the pandemic is all the more reason to strengthen our resolve, because COVID-19 has caused a spike in gun purchases and on our streets, an increase in the numbers of guns and gun violence. So I want to thank all of you who are on this call, because you are at the tip of the spear in this fight. The beautiful lives of 20 children and 6th grade educators continue to cry out to us and demand from us the same grace and dignity and courage that they and their loved ones have demonstrated all these 8 years. If we fail to act, we are indeed complicit. Congress has been complicit. And what was said on the floor of the Senate from the gallery that day that the Senate failed to pass universal background checks will be true even more so if we fail to act. Shame, shame on us if we fail to seize this historic opportunity under this new administration to do what is a historic mandate, honor with action, and end gun violence. Thank you again to CAGV and to all of you.
Thank you so much, Senator Blumenthal, for always being a champion on this issue. We know that your job is not easy, and we are eternally grateful to you and Senator Murphy for really holding the line, for pushing smart legislation in Congress and making sure that we are all protected here in Connecticut. Up next, I have the extreme pleasure to introduce our Lieutenant Governor, Susan Bysiewicz.
Jeremy, thank you so much for having me. Our hearts are heavy today as we mark 8 years since 20 beautiful children, Charlotte, Daniel, Olivia, Josephine, Anna, Dylan, Madeline, Catherine, Chase, Jesse, James, Grace, Emily, Jack, Noah, Caroline, Jessica, Benjamin, Aviel, and Allison, and 6 courageous women, Dawn, Mary, Vicky, Lauren, Rachel, and Anne Marie, were taken from us all too soon. And now those 20 children would be 14 or 15 years old, thinking about their prom, playing sports, thinking about going to college, and they will never have the opportunity to marry their sweetheart or have their own children. And those 6 women never had the opportunity to go back to their own families and live their lives. And so today we think back to a very, very tragic day in our country's history. And in the hours and the days and the months that followed that horrible day, we saw an unprecedented outpouring of kindness and hope from millions of people across our state and our country that showed that light and love can drive out hate. And today we reassess and we think about the things that we can do to continue to honor the memory of those that were lost. Here in our state, over the past 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, we've lost 2,056 people in Connecticut to gun violence. And so despite the progress that we have made in our state, and we have been a national leader, but we cannot just pass the most progressive laws in our country. And make no mistake, we have done that. We need Congress to do the same. But it's not just laws that are needed at the national level, and they certainly are. Congress can't even pass a universal background check that the vast majority of people in our country support. We need more than laws. We need to rededicate ourselves to increasing awareness about the dangers of mental illness. We need to expand treatment of mental illness, and we need to reduce the stigma that is attached to those who suffer from mental illness. And we need to make sure, especially during this pandemic, where the people of our state and our country are under so much stress, that they have access to the help that they need, so that we never have another tragedy like the one that we experienced in our state. And Governor Lamont and I rededicate ourselves to working with you, Jeremy, and Tara, and all of the advocates who have done amazing work in this area. And we want the families of those who have lost their loved ones to gun violence to know that our arms are wrapped around you, and that our state's prayers are with you, and that we will act and together make a difference to end gun violence. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Susan, for your words and your actions, and for really making this issue at the forefront, and making sure that we are all safe here in Connecticut, and doing everything that you can to make sure all of our communities are protected. Thank you all for joining us this morning. It is really hard to believe that 8 years ago, the unimaginable happened in the most unlikely of places. And as we just heard from the Lieutenant Governor, in Connecticut, 2,056 people have died from a gunshot in the last 10 years. Since Sandy Hook, close to 300,000 people have been killed in the United States by guns. That's 100 people per day, over 40,000 people per year. And this year, gun shootings in our cities have become just as concerning, if not more concerning, than the pandemic that we're fighting. And in places like New Haven, the number of gun homicides have doubled this year. Black and brown communities have been hit the hardest. And today we all weep for those lost 8 years ago: children, teachers, sons and daughters, friends. But today cannot just be about Sandy Hook. We must also tell the story of the 180 other people who have died from gun violence this year in Connecticut. You will hear from Janet Rice right after me, who will talk about losing her son Shane 8 years ago. And following her, we will read the names of those who died in Sandy Hook Elementary School, but also all of those who have died in Connecticut this year from gun violence. We must put a stop to this now. Vigils are not enough. We must commit to action. The cries of never again and not one more have gone unanswered by the failure to pass even one single federal law. Gun sales have doubled in some places due to the pandemic. However, the absence of federal law reform, despite the passion and leadership of those people you've heard today, like those in Connecticut's congressional delegation, does not render us powerless. We must remember that each of us has the power to create change, especially at the state level, especially right here in Connecticut. With the hard work of so many of you that have taken the pain of Sandy Hook and turned it into action, the pain of losing a loved one and turning it into action. As a result of turning tragedy into advocacy, we've achieved remarkable things here in Connecticut by passing some of the strongest gun laws and giving us some of the lowest gun death rates in the nation. And perhaps with a new president and possibly new members of Congress, we will see this change. But if they won't act, then we will do it state by state by state until we end gun violence. And we will lead by example right here in Connecticut. We must not just grieve for the victims of gun violence. We must honor their lives with action. Each and every one of us must work to create the world we want our children to live in. Let's all be the change. And now it is my extreme pleasure to introduce Janet Rice.
Thank you, Jeremy. As my colleagues and I were preparing and meeting to put this vigil together, we kept hearing, we kept saying the loss, the loss, the loss. And I realized that those precious little 20 little precious souls were not lost. They were prematurely snatched away from their families, just as my shame was snatched away from me. 55 days before the Sandy Hook massacre occurred, my son Shane, 20-year-old, was on his way to, he was picking up money that was owed to him for a car that he had sold. And right after that, he and his girlfriend was gonna be going to a vigil for his friend, Angel Ito Garcia, who had come up missing the year before. They never got a chance to make it to the vigil. Shane got into an argument with Luis Rodriguez, and that verbal altercation turned physical, then fatal. Shane was shot in his back. He died fighting for his life in surgery at Hartford Hospital. Too often in our Black and Brown communities, moms like myself have to hear those words from trauma doctors. I'm sorry, we did all we could. Together, we need to take a stand and do all we can to stop this vicious cycle. We need to do everything we can to stop, reduce, and end gun violence in the state of Connecticut. And it can be done. It can be done if we all come together. We can do this. "55 days Shane was shot and the Sandy Hook massacre occurred." I was mortified. I felt the pain of those parents, and it was just, I just wanted to run to them and just let them know that I too am going through the same thing that they're going through, and whatever it is that I can do to help them, I'm here. I want to do whatever I can. I got the pleasure to meet a lot of the parents. And I don't know. And just to know that today we're still going through the same thing. We are still riding down the streets and seeing makeshift memorials for people that are being gunned down in our communities. This is ridiculous, and we need to do something about it. I just hope that 2021 brings about a change for Connecticut. That's what I'm looking for. 2020 was, we had over 180 deaths in 2020. 2021 must bring about a change. Today we remember the lives that were snatched in Sandy Hook 8 years ago. Charlotte Bacon, Daniel Barden, Rachel Diavano, Olivia Engel,
Josephine Gay, Dylan Hockman, Dawn Lafferty Hochsprung, Madeline Shu, Catherine Hubbard,
Chase Kowalski, Jesse Lewis, Anna Marquez Green, James Mattioli, Grace McDonald,
Anne Marie Murphy, Emily Parker, Jack Pinto, Noah Posner, Caroline Praviti, Jessica Rickles,
Abiel Richmond, Lauren Rousseau, Mary Sherlock, Victoria Soto, Benjamin Wheeler, Allison Wyatt,